panel. I'm going to go through the introductions fairly quickly since we only have 45 minutes, and I know Dr. Alicia Williams has a hard stop and will have to potentially leave a little early, and others may as well. So first, please ignore my reading glasses. I'd like to introduce Dr. Dewana Parker. She's an adjunct professor at Winona State University in the ED program. Dr. Parker is a career educator with experience in K-12, higher ed, and as an instructor and advisor in the nonprofit sector, as a former director of diversity, equity, and student success, and is the co-founder and director of institutional projects at Bookish and Sage Editors. Dr. Parker's research interests include teacher career longevity and doctoral student persistence. She's currently working on a book chapter on surviving toxic and tyrannical leadership. Excuse my, haven't had coffee yet this morning. Welcome, Dr. Parker. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alicia Williams. Dr. Williams is an HR and DEI executive and DEI professor at George Washington University. She's a consultant and co-producer of the Race Today podcast, practitioner who believes in living into multiple identities to which we belong. Next is Cassandra Larson. Cassandra is Senior Coordinator, Orientation and Engagement into Mason at George Mason University and a graduate student at GMU Higher Education and Student Development Program. I'd like to also welcome Kim Moore. Kim is Vice President for Workforce Innovation, and in this position, she is responsible for developing strategic solutions that address the needs of employers and those seeking to enter the workforce. Prior to joining Tallahassee Community College, she served as the Chief Executive Officer of Workforce Plus, becoming the youngest person, the first African American, and the first woman to hold the position. Welcome. Next is Dr. Linda Bird-Poller. She is Director of Human Resources at Thomas Nelson Community College in Hampton, Virginia. Dr. Bird holds 30+ years in education, trained in diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitation and education, served in public school and college leadership. Her research interests are in self/identity, leadership and organizational development, design, change, and trauma. Dr. Bird is currently editing a book with fellow George Washington University grads due out this summer entitled The Role of Leadership in Facilitating Healing and Renewal in Times of Organizational Trauma and Change. I'd also like to welcome Jill Manuel, who put this all together for you today. Jill is a graduate admissions specialist at George Mason University, an SACRAO Topics in Higher Education co-chair. She's a graduate student in the Mason Higher Education and Student Development Program and currently serves as Vice President for the Higher Education Student Association and is the unit representative for GAPSA, the Graduate and Professional Student Association. Her research interests lie in underserved student populations and identifying ways to facilitate academic success. Did I miss anyone? Do I have everyone? Okay, great. So we're here today to have a courageous conversation. We all hear over and over again about difficult conversations. Well, this is going to be one of them. And we're actually very proud of that because we want it to be open, we want it to be honest, and we want it to be raw. We have some questions to start with that I'm going to pose to the panelists, and then they're going to volunteer to speak as they wish to answer them. If we go down a slightly different path than we anticipated, we're comfortable with that. We will try to get to Q&A at the end, but because we only have 45 minutes, that may be tough. So Jill is going to text those to me so she can find them and I can find them easily, but I apologize in advance if we aren't able to get it. So the first question that I'd like to pose to the panel is, what does being a courageous ally really mean? For example, intentionality, commitment, institutionalized change, recognizing and addressing microaggressions and macroaggressions. Things like white-splaining. In other words, taking something that a Black colleague may have said to you and saying it over again in your own words. the need to unlearn certain behaviors or processes that may have existed within your department or your college, at a school, or even your entire institution, and rethinking what a leader looks like. We traditionally, you look at anything on government, you see a lot of middle-aged white men in leadership positions. So you really need to think differently. What it means if you label your Black women colleagues as angry or mean, or that you cry and you accuse somebody of bullying you. Talk about performative allyship, which is allyship in name only. I posted on my Facebook, I put it on my Instagram, I wear a t-shirt, I went to some rallies, but I really don't go deeper than that. And when my schedule's busy, I have other things to attend to. I want to be a good person, and I'm caught up in the anti-racism movement, or I want to consider myself an ally, but that's kind of as far as I've gone. And then what we've all seen really starting in the fall semester after George Floyd and all the protests is, let's just add "and diversity" to everything that we're teaching and to all of our curriculum, or "and Black Lives Matter" or anti-racism, but no context or budget or support for that. So I know it's a huge question. Please take it as you want. Who wants to raise their hand first? All right, Dr. Williams, I see you scratching your chin.
Yeah.
You're in.
There's so much to unpack there. And I know my other lovely ladies have lots to chime into as well. But I know one of the things that I think can hinder the relationship, I think, or get in the way of that relationship, specifically related to allyship. And again, when we think about allyship, it's really about being in a privileged position, right? You are the holder of the power. And a true ally is then someone who's going to use that power to elevate those who are underrepresented and those voices that are underrepresented. And so I see that truly as allyship. And when I have had experiences, I had to chime into the white splaining in particular, or white female splaining, where I have had, interactions where a white female colleague really was in alignment with my position of this being out of order as it relates to a particular microaggression, but then finds herself explaining my position for me. And again, she is trying to ensure that I know she is trying to be my ally, but oftentimes by taking it out of my hands and using her voice to explain my voice, is really diminishing and devaluing and dismissive and not supportive of allyship.
Who would like to add?
I'll go ahead and chime in. So when we think about, or at least the way that I think about allyship, everything I believe starts with relationship of some kind. And so you have to begin to build relationships in whatever context you're in. And so if it happens to be an academic context or a professional context, relationship begins with a one-on-one, a sort of a horizontal type relationship. When you're looking at women of color, Black women and white women forming a relationship. Now, it's hard sometimes to form a relationship if you're a white woman and you don't know any Black women or Black people, or none of those people are in your circle. It slows down, I guess, your trajectory in trying to create a relationship with a woman of color. And so there has to be sort of an openness. There's got to be an avenue where an open conversation can happen. I think before we even look at how one can elevate the other, we have to meet we have to find a place where we can both meet, so that you can understand. As a white woman, you can gain an understanding of what my situation is, what my challenges are as a woman of color in a particular context. And I think trying to understand that, or being able to get to a place where you understand that, it will then be the springboard for that, for creating an allyship between and among women of color and white women. So I believe it starts with forming a relationship and trying to understand where the woman of color, where the Black woman is within the context, and then finding ways to elevate the relationship, or ways to see things from her point of view. It's hard to, I saw something on Facebook the other day that says, you can't walk a mile or don't try to walk a mile in my shoes and then tell me how to tie my laces. You can't, you can't do that walk with me if you're trying to take over. It really is a time to learn and a time to absorb those things that do create that, that where you can understand as a white person with privilege because of your whiteness, then you can begin to bring some understanding to the relationship.
Yeah, so Holly, I would simply add, I think Dr. Parker is right. It does start with a relationship, but I think it's important to be cautious too, because one relationship doesn't transfer over to another. And just because you learn of one experience and one need of a Black or a person of color, a woman of color's need in that situation, it doesn't mean that that's the same need that every woman will have. And so I think it's very important that, and as Dr. Parker said, start with a relationship. Who are you? What is your need? How can I be the best ally that I can be for you? And what is it that I can learn from this situation to put, to help crystallize what I know across, right? And that knowledge might help you in certain situations, but not to generalize, right, across all women of color. And that's the danger. And I think it's important that you recognize that you are speaking with individuals and that these are individual needs, and how you address that, I agree with you, is not to stand in my shoes, right? Don't stand on top of me, but to stand beside me, learn from me, and hear me, right? So hear what I'm saying and try to ask questions that help to advance your understanding. But again, that's understanding with you and I, and not across all women of color.
So, Kim, I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Is that okay? Or do you want to?
I was going to chime in on that, but absolutely.
No. Go ahead, chime in. Go ahead and chime in, and then I'll pose a question to everybody.
No, so it was really a great response in the dialogue going back and forth. But I think, again, sharing that allyship really doesn't mean that you're providing a voice and advocacy for that person. It just means that their voice hasn't been heard. So you don't need to replace their voice.
Right.
You have a voice. You just need to listen. So I would just end with that piece of it. But Holly, I welcome your question as well.
Sorry about that. Some background noise I had to get rid of. So one of the things that I can say in the sessions that we've done that comes across very clearly is white women have a great fear of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, appearing imperfect, appearing racist. And so there's a lot of inaction just due to the deer in headlights situation, which is I'd rather do nothing than do the wrong thing. So would love to hear some perspective of, okay, building a relationship, your colleagues, you may not know each other that well, you may get to know each other a little better, maybe you have lunch or whatever, but how do you approach this topic? And also, as somebody who might be willing to engage with a white ally, what work do you need them to do before they even come to you to educate themselves so that they're not looking at you and saying, can you do all the work and teach me everything I need to know about racism?
Right.
I'm starting from scratch and I want to help you, but can you spend all of your time educating me now, please? So who wants to
realize that that we're all individuals and that there's not one person that can offer us perspective on an entire race. You can't go to me and ask me about Dr. Alicia Williams, what her likes are, and just assume that I will be able to answer for a voice of people.
Right.
So I think starting with that understanding and realizing that that really is worrisome and bothersome up front, that you would assume that there is just one handbook or one guide for the Black woman.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. What do Black people think about this? What, I
Right.
can't speak for every, you know, we're not a monolith. So, you know, I can't speak for every Black person. I can speak for me, but
Yes.
I can't speak for everyone.
You
I
know
would
what? I
say
would
just
think, oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead. You can go ahead, Dr. Bird.
My first initial response was just be honest, right? In what your intentions are, but also, you know, to Kim's point is you see one thing on the surface. You don't know all the layers that make me who I am and the journey that I have had to come to this point. So be honest, don't assume, right? And be very upfront and explicit about what your intentions are. I'm happy to tell you what you can go to read to help yourself, but I agree that that burden needs to be acknowledged, that oftentimes it's an attempt to teach me what I don't know, and I don't know what you don't know, so I can't teach you, and it's not fair for it to be my role to do that, to be a self-regulated person, and to be someone who's interested in your own development. You must take the lead on that, but come to me honestly, come to me without assumptions, and be explicit about what it is you want in this relationship. I go back to what Dr. Parker said about this relationship, and you know, we can go from there. But that's my take, right? Again, it's not a cookie cutter for every woman.
Right.
Right. And I think, again, just to chime in, and again, speaking, the core is that relationship. But as Dr. Bird talked about, for me, it really is about knowing that you are generally curious, right? You are interested. You are interested in my lived experiences and what that's really like, in a very genuine, authentic, humble and transparent way. I think that goes, for me, I'm speaking for me, goes a long way. When I have had people of color approach me, especially right after George Floyd, I have a variety of different friends. And when the non-POCs approached me, we had that relationship, right? Or had a desire to further that relationship. And so when the reach out came, it was, well, you know, what is it that you are trying to unpack? You know, there was a genuine curiosity, a help me understand. And that just for me it went a really long way for us to then be able to take the book, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and read it separately, and then come back together and unpack it together. It was a really powerful experience that I really value. I know I absolutely hear Dr. Bird that it is traumatically a burden for us to constantly be the ones that have to educate. So I agree with that, and I affirm that. And I also, though, am very open to those people who approach me with that genuine, authentic, vulnerable interest and curiosity in helping and finding a way to understand.
Right.
So I think.
Can I add? Sorry. Do you mind if I add something, Holly?
No, absolutely.
Just to kind of like continue with what Dr. Alicia and Dr. Bird was saying, especially about the education piece, because coming from like kind of a white woman perspective, for me, as far as kind of like allyship and ally, it's really making that choice and making it a priority that's who you want to be. And really kind of like, there's all these terms that are floating around right now, right? Critical theory, socialization, intersectionality, discrimination, prejudice. And while we may have heard these terms our entire lives, maybe we never really quite understood what they meant. So really making sure that you're aware of what the foundation of the issue is, so that when you go and you build these relationships and you reach out to people, you already have like, you're kind of understanding the concrete of the issue, but you want to dive further, deeper. And I know they mentioned a book by D'Angelo, White Fragility. I only read a little bit of it, but I read another book by her and Sensoy called Is Everyone Really Equal? And the first half of the book just does a really good job of just explaining these terms and making it understandable. And for me, at least, that was a great first step for me in order to continue this journey into being more of a proactive ally to kind of create any type of meaningful change.
Mhm.
I'd like to just add on to that, especially with the relationships component, excuse me. I think these relationships, they have to be reciprocal, right? And they can't be for the purpose of trying to learn or trying to become an ally. I mean, the questions that I posed to my friends of color were based off of our pre-existing relationship. So before George Floyd, if I had questions about that, I didn't just find the first Black person that I could to ask them to educate me. I went to the person who I felt like I had that underlying solid relationship before I even looked at the need or, for allyship or for greater understanding. And so when I asked questions, it was an open dialogue. It wasn't one person taking the onus of educating another. And so I feel like if we are going to be allies for people of color, that it has to be a continuous education. It's not, you don't just get there, right? This is an ongoing mission for all people to get to this point of equity. And so I feel like while those relationships are important, it's important to recognize the type of relationship that you have with a person before approaching them. And then if you are that person being approached, also gauging that, so what you're contributing to that. If it's directing them to go read this book, that's one type of relationship. If it's an open dialogue over a drink, that is a completely different relationship.
Right. And I wanted to just kind of connect with what Jill just mentioned, don't just show up, get what you can get and leave, right? That's not really building the relationship. You show up, you stand up, and you stay beside, right? We walk along beside each other through this journey of discovery. And so I really appreciated you hitting that, Jill.
I'd also like to add, being privileged enough to be a part of these conversations and learn so much from them, that I'd like to echo something that Jill said, which is what you're talking about is a lifelong commitment.
That's right.
It's a change of a way of thinking. It's a change of a way of looking at yourself, and looking at yourself has to be the first place that you start. I think you brought it up in some context also, Dr. Williams, that why are you here? What do you want? What do you want to get out of this? What is your outlook and philosophy on life? And you're not making a hard and fast decision. Hopefully, the answers to these questions are going to evolve along your journey. And a lot of it is self-discovery. But it's sort of like the difference between a diet and changing your way of eating for the rest of your life. You are committing to evolving into a different human being. And along the way, you have to constantly reassess what that means to you and where you want to go. And it's going to change potentially daily, depending on your interactions with other human beings. But if you haven't started with that place and it's just, well, I read something in a paper and I thought it was interesting, so I wanted to learn more, you need to go back and start at ground zero and educate yourself some first. Yes, you can build it into your relationship, but I think it reiterates what you all said, which is it's not your colleagues or your friends' place to teach you everything. It's your place to educate yourself, to figure out who and what you are and what you stand for. And it'll be much easier for you to evaluate your own behavior, your own microaggressions, your own way of treating other people if it connects with who you want to be as a human being.
Oh, I totally agree with you, Holly. And I'm glad you said that, because what we initially were talking about are those beginning relationships. And those are external, right, with other folks. But who's a relationship, and forgive me, because that's where I see things from self, right, and identity. And so who do you see yourself to be? And if you want to be this kind of change agent, then what are you going to commit to doing over the long term? And at the point when there is no person of color around that you know, can you still stand up and can you still say that I'm going to be in a place of allyship for anyone that's in that space, right? That I see that these things are occurring. And so that's almost like this self-actualized being of who you are, but you have to want to do that.
Yes.
And there's a commitment and there's a
Mhm.
cost, right? You have to
Mhm.
consider the cost and you have to be willing to do it consistently and over time. So these are beginning relationships with people you know, those that you don't know. But what happens when there is no one in that space that you know, but you see that there are things that need to be changed and need to be addressed? Will you have enough courage to say, this isn't right?
Yes, to
Mhm.
still be
That's
the
a-
ally, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
That's a great point because it is a very hard conversation to initiate, regardless of the relationship.
That's
You know,
right.
if there is an existing relationship, I grew up in the very deep South. And so for me to approach my friends of color with these topics is very uncomfortable because the last thing that I want to do is offend anybody. So I think to your point, Dr. Bird, is that we have to educate. We have to have a foundation of education and understanding. You have to know going into this that it is uncomfortable, that it's
Mhm.
not easy, and that we bear as much responsibility in attempting to be allies and attempting to build this community of equity. You have to have that foundation, and you have to have the willingness to educate yourself before you approach others,
That's right.
so that you can have open dialogue, because it can't be one-sided. Again, I know I said it before, it just can't be one-sided.
So actually, these are perfect transitions into the next part of our conversation, which is about allyship in that professional setting and what you as a white woman, what I as a white woman might be doing or not doing unintentionally or intentionally to sabotage my Black colleagues or to not stand up for them. And I'd like to share a personal example of something I learned just the other day, which again comes from a place of privilege of not even realizing that this could be an issue. So there's obviously stereotypes. I guarantee we've all heard it, the angry Black woman. When a Black woman speaks, points out an issue or something that's happened, white women tend to either cry or be defensive or accuse Black women of bullying them or being mean. And what was interesting in this conversation that I was having in preparation for a different webinar was one of the women on the call who is African American. She's a chief diversity officer at a campus. And she said, I never raise my voice. I'm very conscious. I mean, her whole job is being a chief diversity officer. So she's very, very self-aware of how she broaches topics, how she talks with people, how she interacts with people. She said, I never raise my voice when I bring up a sensitive topic or otherwise. I'm not a yeller. That's just not who I am. And yet, in bringing up a sensitive conversation or a sensitive topic, when that story is told by the other party later on, it will be told, because the feedback has come back to me, that I was yelling at her, when I know I did not raise my voice. So there's this energy around the conversation that happens even though the scenario didn't actually exist. And that's something that was learning for me. And that's part of what I mean as a white woman by learning every single day, because I know when I'm yelling and I know when I'm not. I'm from New York. I'm probably yelling sometimes. But that is not put upon me or ascribed to me because of my white privilege. And if in this conversation you don't know what white privilege is, the first thing you need to do is go look that up and get a better understanding of it. It's an understanding that when you walk into a room, there are certain benefits, assumptions, privileges given to you just by virtue of the fact that you're white that people are not conscious of, that are not given to people of color. Okay, so I'd like to bring up a few other examples and then put it out to the panel because we only have about 15 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
I know, it goes fast.
In our
So,
pre-meeting, I had asked something similar to that, and Dr. Williams had an excellent response to me that I hope that she
okay,
has
so I won't even
to-
go into the other details. Do you want to?
I'm so sorry, Holly.
Dr. Williams?
I'm not sure what I said before, but I just sitting here, I was reliving into some different experiences that I can speak to directly. But what it also
You just muted
You
yourself.
just
Dr.
muted yourself.
Shoot, thank you. Okay. What it brought me to was honestly a situation of white female solidarity. So there's this white tears, which is, again, Robin DiAngelo talks about that and the environment that creates. Also, I think we've heard of it in society in terms of Karens, the Karens of the world, and those experiences which are created in particular for the Black community. But what I also have experienced are situations of where it could be myself and a white female colleague of mine. We are in agreement with a particular point of view. And then when it comes to, when I come to the table to actually share that point of view that we have agreed to, and she understands where I'm coming from, because it may create a feeling in that other white female of making her, well, really calling her out on some misbehavior. I have found that my other white female colleague will defend, come to her rescue, even though she and I had already agreed that this point of view was the correct point of view. And that I have seen really interestingly show up quite a bit, this white female solidarity, that if a white colleague sees that their other white female colleague may be under fire, regardless of the relationship that myself and this white female colleague had, she then comes to the other white female's rescue or perceived need for a rescue to defend her, to have her back in spite of the fact that she originally had my back. So that white female solidarity is something that I too have seen show up in some of the spaces that I've found myself in. Was that it, Jill? I can't remember if it was that or something else, but. Nope, Jill's frozen, I think.
No,
That
she's
was
just
still a
muted.
fabulous point.
I think
So
she's just- yeah.
Okay.
one of the things, actually picking up a little bit on that, two of the points that we had talked about was as far as white colleagues supporting people of color in their environment, from a leadership perspective, I know one of the things we talked about, and I think it was Kim, but please correct me if I was wrong, of you're doing a great job training people, but we don't really have a path to leadership for you. We had quite a long conversation about that. So we'd love to explore that a little bit. And also engaging Black colleagues or women of color more to be on panels to talk about race. But, oh, by the way, you're an electrical engineer, and I'm not going to ask you at all about how we can work together on electrical engineering. I'm feeling good about myself because I'm asking you to work more with me, but the work I'm asking you to do has nothing to do with your actual discipline. So Kim, was I right that that was you who brought up this
You
stuff?
are absolutely right about that, how it repeats itself over and over. You're skilled enough to prepare someone else for leadership, but you are not prepared to go into the job. And the padded statement that you always hear is that that person hasn't been exposed enough, they haven't gotten the experience, yet there's enough to train someone else. And by the way, I haven't gotten the experience because you've not allowed that, you've not afforded me that opportunity. So yes, that is absolutely happens consistently.
I would also say that in my experience from an HR lens is that we often let women of color serve in interim or acting roles. And then somehow or another, after doing the role for some time, and they go to apply for the role, they're somehow not qualified. And that's curious because we've allowed them to do the role for 2 years. And so if they've been able to maintain that part of the organization, or even advance that division, somehow or another, now they're not qualified to actually step into that leadership role. So I agree with you, Kim. It's a very interesting dilemma that no one can really, or has not addressed to my satisfaction, as to why this is the case.
That's a really interesting point. I'm curious of any of you who lead teams or have people who report to them, do you not see it as your responsibility to get your team promoted, to raise them as you would your children and have
Right.
them lead you?
Right.
You want to speak to that a little bit, Alicia, or should I just?
No, I just was affirming
Okay.
that. Again, as a manager, as a
Right.
leader, it is very much the expectation in my role that I am
That's right.
providing my staff with the tools, the resources that they need to ultimately, succeed, come into my position, right? As I move on to the next capacity. But again, in agreement with Kim and with Dr. Bird, and this was a lot of my research was focused on this in particular, that the African-American females in leadership roles really are not provided the support, the resources, the tools that they need to be successful, to navigate those challenging circumstances. They're not given the access. They're not given the, again, the contact names, whatever it is that they need to be successful in their roles. We find that African-American female leaders in particular are left behind. So it is something that I hope, I would expect my boss to want to provide access, resources, tools, support to me in my capacity, not only to benefit the organization, right? Ensuring that I am equipped with everything I need to be successful for this organization, but she sees me, or he sees me, as a valued individual, right? A valued professional that can also contribute in other capacities and other contexts that would benefit me, right? As the individual.
And if you can't see it in yourself, right, to support me, get out of the way. Because a lot of times the supervisors literally are the gatekeepers.
Yes.
They will determine what courses you get to go to. And, well, you're not ready. You're a mother of 4. You have a lot of responsibilities. That's not yours to determine. It really is not your place to determine that. You need to get out of the way.
Indeed. And so often, well, I don't want to say so often, but in my experience, it has been the stonewalling or the disingenuous support, when the leader is saying, well, there are some opportunities that are coming along, and, this is being created and we're working on this and you'd be great for this. And then when that particular thing comes along, you are somehow not considered in that when they have come to you and already have said, this is coming along, you'd be great to do this, you've got the training, you've got the education, you've got the experience, and then it just somehow dissipates and you are absolutely looked over, and someone else is selected, or the position goes away, or whatever it is. And so I feel I would be better off if you were just honest with me to begin with, to just let me know we're working on this position. I don't think, you're probably not going to be the one, just tell me up front so that I won't be, there's a place for honesty that we really need to have in the forefront. And we need to not be disingenuous with people and what I call, lead them along, string them along, because, you have someone who is qualified, who is ready to move in a particular direction, and you cut them off at the knees that way. And again, which is certainly not best practices in leadership in organizations, but it happens. And that's another thing that allies, can certainly, see and look out for and call it when they see it that way. So, that would be helpful.
Dr. Parker, don't you think that's a part of the person, though? That's more on them than it is on us. We feel it, and we certainly have the cost of the consequence, but that's an individual who is, in my opinion, just unethical to lead you on that way. And that speaks more to them and their ability to be genuine.
Right,
And
but and I
authentic.
agree with that. But so often, this kind of leader is, I would even say sometimes even admired in the organization
Oh,
for,
yeah.
whatever they contribute to the organization. And so there are often, well, I'll just say in my experience, more people who support the leader, right? And are looking to that leader. And so when he or she, behaves in this manner,
Mhm.
it's hard for other people to call it, because they
They're
see
the
the
leader.
leader in a particular light.
Right.
That's the leader.
They're the
It
trusted
must not have been right, so
Right.
Yeah.
so it's, yeah. And I hear you on that, Dr. Pollard, that that's an individual thing, but I do think that I've done some research on that, and that is I don't want to necessarily say a trend, but it is definitely a phenomenon, in the field.
So
Well,
I'm
and if
going to
the
check for
leadership
just a
is
second
supported,
because we only have 2 or 3 minutes left. Jill, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, and perhaps you were doing a time check. I do want to ask one quick question. How many people on the panel either have been mentored, like truly mentored, or have a mentor, or have mentored others?
I've been in both positions.
Mhm.
I have a mentor.
I have a mentor, I'm Dr. Parker.
How am I doing, Jill? How am I doing?
But you know what, Holly? But also, Holly, there's the concept of a sponsor.
Mhm.
And so what's interesting is oftentimes they speak of that sponsor within your organization, right? That
Mhm.
individual who can get you to that next position, and they're ensuring you're in front of the right people and those types of things. They often can be someone who's not of color, or someone, a Caucasian individual. And what I have found is I have a couple of sponsors that are not in my organization that are both white men. And
Mhm.
so when it's interesting, that relationship, when things come up, it's like, well, how would the white guy, how would the white guy do it, right? I will reach out to them and ask, well, what do you think about this? Does this make sense? Or, how should I approach this? But they also, I think, to Jill's point, in terms of that relationship, that mutual, they will reach out to me and say, well, how would a Black woman feel
Mhm.
about this? And so I truly do, we see each other. They see me as a sponsor and I see them as a sponsor, which is a little bit different than this usual definition of sponsorship. But that has been really, really helpful at navigating some interesting environments that I found myself in too.
Dr.
Yeah,
Williams, that's a great point because my
Right.
entire professional career, my sponsors have all been white males.
Isn't that
Every
interesting?
role.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's
Interesting.
interesting. That's a research point
That's
for
a
me.
topic for a
It
whole
is.
So
seminar.
I think that's actually, and I don't want to cut off Jill, so I'm going to let her have the last word because I felt terrible.
No, I was just saying that's a topic for an entirely new committee. I think that's
Yeah.
another discussion. Yeah.
Well, actually,
I was going to say to Dr. Parker's point earlier, with the leadership, when your institution supports the leader to that extent, that
Mhm.
practice then becomes institutionalized.
Yes.
And I really don't think there's any way around that. And I think that we need to acknowledge that, because when you have the college president who is supporting the person who is misappropriating their power,
Mhm.
it becomes an institutional practice.
I think those are all excellent points. I love the use of the word sponsor. Like I said, I learn something new every day, and that is going to be the way I phrase it from now on. Because you're right, a mentor is someone you go to it for advice. A sponsor is somebody who is the wind beneath your wings and pushes you forward. And gets you where you need to be seen. And I think that's a great place. Unfortunately, we have to end. It is literally 11:45. And this has been a phenomenal conversation. I wish we could keep going. I hope that everyone got as much out of it as I did. I've always said, if you get 1 or 2 nuggets from a conference or a combination or a conversation or a webinar, it was worth your time. And I got many, sponsor being key. So I want to thank everyone very much on the panel. And I want to challenge everybody here who was listening to do some self-reflection and to do some education, to think about your behavior and who you are as a person and who you think you want to be and what you need to do to get there, and how you need to listen as a white woman. I think that's the most important thing, is to have humility and to listen with humility. So thank you, everybody. And I'm going to throw it back to Jill, and especially thank her because she put this all together. And I know we have been harassing her endlessly in doing so. So thank you so much.
I want to thank you all very much on behalf of SACRAO and personally for your patience, your willingness to contribute. Lots of accolades coming through on the chat. You guys were a phenomenal panel, and I really look forward to the opportunity of working with you all again. Thank you so much. And Holly, thank you in particular for compiling all of our thoughts from our previous discussions and making this a really beneficial and rewarding experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
everyone. Thank you,
you.
Holly. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, other lovely ladies as well.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, everybody. Be safe
Bye.
and healthy. Take care.